Politics, crime, education. What's happening here with the people who know? The views and opinions expressed on this program are not necessarily those of this station. Now, your on-target St. John's host, Linda Swain.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and Happy New Year. The first show of 2021, and it's back to work today for a lot of people after the Christmas holiday period, myself included. While 2021, of course, is just a number on the calendar and carries no real significance in and of itself, psychologically, it does mark an important transition for a lot of people, whether that means the end of 2020, which has been a notable year for all the obvious reasons, hope for the year ahead, or a time to take stock and make those much needed or desired changes in your life. My guest today is familiar to many. Dr. Janine Hubbard, of course, is a registered psychologist. I'll get my mouth in gear yet. And a semi-regular contributor to our show. And she joins us on the line. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, Linda. Lovely to be here to start off the year.
Indeed. And I trust you had a good holiday.
I did. Sometimes appreciating small and quiet is a good reminder of, maybe we don't always need the chaos and the excess that we have come to associate with the holidays.
Amen
small
to
and
that.
Quiet can be really enjoyable.
It can indeed. So, a new year always brings about these, reflections on the past and that. What is it about the changing of the calendar year that puts us all in this mode of reflection and renewal?
Well, I think it's in some ways a useful tool, and in some ways it's a completely arbitrary tool. So depending on how you want to approach things, it can be a time to sort of stop, reflect on what's gone well, what hasn't gone so well. It's a time to kind of pause and do some introspection and say, what would I like to have look different in my life moving forward? Again, of course, you can do that any day of the year, but for many, many years and for many reasons, we've used the start of the new calendar year as kind of that artificial reset point.
We're coming out of a time of celebration, albeit more subdued this year than others for many people. That often means excess. Could mean feasting, overdoing the snacking on treats and that, or even imbibing. And a lot of people are feeling like they need a little break from all of that. How do you transition out of some of those excesses?
Well, some of it is situational, for sure. If you've been socializing with people, there is more of that tendency to have the nibblies, to have the beverages, as opposed to, I had to pack a lunch this morning. My goodness, that was an interesting reminder. So getting back into some of the structure and routine of more normal work will certainly help with some of that, just right off the bat. But some of it is also then just kind of stopping and saying, okay, right, I've let things get a little out of hand. What are some changes I can make? I think the big thing to remember is depriving yourself, kind of going cold turkey and saying, no, I'm not doing anything, very rarely works for very long. It's more doing some small baby step introductions of things that you want to do. So, for example, saying, okay, you know what, as opposed to saying, well, I'm cutting out all of the junk food and all the cheese and crackers and everything that I've been eating, how about I make sure I have one more serving of vegetables today? Maybe make sure I eat a carrot before I go for the cheese and crackers. It sounds silly and it sounds little, but it's those small changes that will help. Trying to deprive yourself, trying to do anything radical generally doesn't last very long.
Sometimes it seems the universe is set against you when it comes to these kinds of things, because try as you might, there's always something being put down in front of you or available, readily available. And it's those, moments after you get home from work, sitting down in front of the TV or on the computer or whatever the case may be, when I don't know, what do I want now? There's always something there to graze on, so to speak. So how do we, even though our mind tells us, try not doing that now, there's something else, some other driving...
Well, first of all, there's a couple of things. There's some easy behavioral things you can do, simply in terms of even how you have your cupboard and your fridge structured. put the container with the ready cut up vegetables at the front and put the chocolate and the cheese towards the back, so that's the first thing that you see when you open the fridge. Same thing with your cupboard. If things aren't in sight, then it makes it a little bit easier. But for a lot of that, you want to look and see what are the reasons why I am snacking. Is it because I'm bored? Is it which is a really common issue? Is it because I'm meeting an emotional need? Am I feeling sad? Am I feeling lonely? And am I feeling stressed? Stop and appraise and say, what is the reason behind this? If it's just, I'm hungry and I've had a really good meal and now I'm having some dessert, no problem. If it's for some of those other reasons, maybe it's time to reassess and reevaluate a little bit.
This is what, I didn't know this until this morning, but this is supposed to be dry January. So this is a time, I suppose, when people take stock of, other consumables. How do you know when a bit of excess crosses the line into a greater dependency?
Again, come back to some of those questions that I was just asking a couple minutes ago, because, we do have some stats that show that alcohol use, tobacco use, cannabis use has increased across throughout the pandemic. That's something that is sometimes used as a short-term coping tool. Well, of course, we wound up with a chronic condition going on, so that what some people might have typically used for, a rough day, they suddenly were using for 9 months. So we do know that there are some people for whom things have increased. But again, it comes down to looking at what impact is it having on my life, but what are the reasons behind it. If I happen to enjoy a beverage with my lovely, well-balanced meal that I've made for the evening, and I'm having it, in the company of others, and then you may say that's okay. There are other people for whom that's too much. But it's really looking at am I using or consuming in order to escape? Am I using or consuming to address underlying emotional issues that perhaps I'm using it, kind of as a way of addressing them instead?
Do you tend to have that understanding yourself, or is it usually somebody who taps you on the shoulder and says, by the way?
Well, it can be both, because again, it's often one of these kind of very slippery slopes. Like anything, I always say if overeating suddenly put on 20 pounds overnight, boy, we would suddenly rapidly notice it and kind of go, okay, my pants don't fit. But it's something that happens gradually, so it is harder. It definitely creeps up. So if you're wondering, ask your loved ones, ask those around you. Even the fact that you're kind of reflecting on that may be really helpful. And of course, remember that there's a lot of values associated with all of this, that you want to be careful that, there are some who will meet your own values and others who may have different feelings, either in excess of or not at all supportive of. So, yeah, you kind of want to match, but talk to your loved ones.
My guest today on Target, the first one of 2021, Happy New Year to you all, is Dr. Janine Hubbard. Check, 1 2 1 2. We'll be back right after this.
Now back to Linda Swain on Target St. John's on VOCM.
My guest today is registered psychologist Dr. Janine Hubbard. First show of 2021 for On Target. Happy New Year to you all. And we're talking a little bit about, this time of year we start to reflect on the year that's passed and think about the year ahead, and we look forward with great hope. And of course, this past year has been a challenging one for a lot of people for a number of reasons. But it's not all bad. I personally kind of liked 2021. I know. It's not a popular thing to say, and I know there's been a lot of suffering, but it really gave me an opportunity to pause and think about what's important in my life, and I managed to do those things that I've always said, well, now when I get a chance, I'll try and get this done. Those kinds of things. So for a lot of people, it's been a tough year, I know, but some of us kind of like that pause that was put on our lives for a brief period of time anyway. Dr. Hubbard, do you see a lot of people who are really struggling with 2020?
Well, I think you pointed out, well, there is a full spectrum. There are some people who will never recover from 2020, whether it's financially or emotionally, and there are others for whom, it presented some stresses and some challenges, but as you said, actually presented some new insights and some new activities and hobbies. So I think it has been very different for everyone, and that's an important reminder for all of us. There's a lovely analogy that we all went through the same storm, but we weren't all in the same kind of boat. And there are some people who, were really treading water, and others who kind of sailed through it, with a little bit of rocky weather going on.
I know we all live in hope, and everybody is looking to 2021 as being a year of hope, and hopefully the worst is behind us. But I think a lot of us understand that things are not going to change anytime real soon. How do you come to terms with that?
Again, I think it's exactly that, knowing that things did not magically change as of January 1st. I'm really hoping for January 1st, 2022, but that we are going to have patience this year, that we have learned a lot of lessons this last year that I'm hoping will carry us forward. We have been exceptionally lucky in this province. In fact, I hear a lot of people talk about almost having survivor's guilt when they have friends and loved ones, elsewhere in the country and elsewhere in the world compared to kind of what we've gone through. But I think it's really important to reflect back on last year. Last year we were very reactive to everything that was going on, and now is the time to be proactive and reflective. I love you mentioned the word pause. I have a colleague of mine who refers to all of this as the great pause. And I think it was really important because it reminded us of the importance of slowing down. And I'm as guilty of it. I'm suddenly back up at full speed going, wait, I commented on how nice it was to have that little bit of extra time, to be able to spend the time with family, to be able to, have the time to make the home-cooked meals. Maybe we shouldn't be in such a hurry to rush back to kind of our old routines and our old habits.
You're almost like you're reading off of my script here, but the routine I found.
You didn't share any of the questions with me ahead of time, I promise.
The break from routine, I think, was important for a lot of us in a lot of different ways. A lot of us thrive on routine, and others just become, myself included, automatons to the routine. Well, this is what I do now. And you're just sort of, going through life without really living it, if you know what I'm saying. Yeah. But we are getting back into a routine now, and for a lot of us who are back in the workplace or who have become more comfortable working from home. And now that we're back after the holiday period, it takes a little getting used to getting back into that routine. I know I'm going around today rather bleary-eyed. A few of my colleagues are the same. And, how do we get back into those routines? Well,
if at all possible, ease yourself back in. Give yourself permission to kind of laugh at some of the jokes. I mean, earlier today was sort of saying first day, new tongue, as I stumbled over my words. Actually, I think that's one of the things the pandemic has really allowed us to do is relax a little bit about some of the stuff that used to stress us out so much. We got used to Zoom calls with children running around naked in the background and dogs barking and cats walking over keyboards, and we got used to comfy pants. And
none of that is bad. None of that is bad. We're human. That is life. And when we saw people doing that and those cats walking over keyboards and get down now, Fluffy, oh, is that Fluffy? Oh my God, he's some sweet. All of a sudden we're connecting with people in a different way.
And I think that is so vital, and I really hope that we're able to embrace that. I was joking with somebody that, we've gotten away from some of the artificiality and some of the stuffiness. I was taking a Christmas gift over to someone and sort of presented it with, there was supposed to be a card, and there was supposed to be tissue paper, and I left both of them at home, but here you go. And just embracing what's really important is not even the gift, but the intent behind the gift, and not getting so caught up on some of those formalities and those trappings that we've all gotten caught up into. So, being okay with saying, it's going to take me a little while to adjust into this. I think we've gotten a little bit. I do think one of the things we've seen is people getting better at saying, I'm struggling, or today's a rough day, or today's a pretty good day. Just being a little bit more open about that. And like I say, just being a little more relaxed.
And some of those social pressures, too. Finally, you have an ability to say, you know what? I'm going to take it easy. I'm going to stay home if that's okay with you. No, I get it. That kind of thing. There's those pressures for socialization aren't there either, even though we are social creatures and we do love socializing.
We do, and I think we've learned the importance of it for sure. But we've also learned to reach out in different ways. Do you know the number of people who told me they've re-embraced the good old-fashioned phone call? Hearing somebody's voice, because while all of the online platforms and the Zooms and the Skypes and the FaceTimes are lovely, if you're doing that all day long at work and you just want to talk to a family member, reconnecting by phone has actually become more popular than ever.
That's very interesting. I can remember wasting many an hour on the phone. I don't do that anymore. It's like, yep. I'd rather text now and keep moving forward if that's the right term. But that's interesting. That connection with phone calls is very interesting.
Well, it's that connection with the human voice as opposed to text. And there's a great time and place for texting, and don't get me wrong, I use it lots. But we have really felt, for people who really felt really socially isolated, that human connection, that being able to hear the emotions, hear the empathy, just gives a different level of connection with each other. But we also got really, really tired of staring at computer screens. Yeah,
amen. We're getting back into that routine, and sleep has been a challenge for a lot of us over the last couple of weeks, myself included. While I was nodding off on the couch last night, I made it up into the room, and of course then I'm bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, looking at the ceiling for several hours. So how do you get back into a normal sleep schedule?
I was going to say, again, I think this morning was very hard on a lot of people, and it will get easier as the week goes on, although, of course, it's very dark that early in the morning. But that will improve as well. Again, it is just getting back into that normal routine. Basic things like you're coming home from work at a certain time, you're having your evening meal at a certain time, you're doing your wind down, whether that's having a bath or a shower or just watching some TV, and trying to be mindful of getting yourself to bed at kind of the time that you might normally. You may find it really rough for the first couple of days, and you may find it difficult, but having that alarm set at the same time in the morning is certainly going to help. So give yourself permission that this week is going to be rough, but give it a couple of days of routinely getting up at the same time, and you'll mostly find that by the end of the week you're kind of back on track.
I'm old enough and ugly enough, as the saying goes, to take care of myself when it comes to trying figuring out a sleep schedule. But it's a whole other thing when you're dealing with a little person who is just like, no, I'd rather stay up all night now, and getting up for school in the morning. The preparations for back to school this morning were a little bit hectic, I have to say.
I can imagine suddenly finding those backpacks, let alone doing the lunch prep. Biggest advice I can give for the little ones, and this will not make me popular, restricting any kind of screen use an hour before bedtime, because we know that interferes with the melatonin production, which is one of the things that helps us gear up to go to sleep. But no electronics in the bedroom. Even if they're like, but I use my phone for my alarm and it's on the other side of the room, the temptation is way too great if you happen to be up and it's easily accessible, and especially if you have any kind of alerts or alarms set. So it's suddenly, there was a notification on Twitter, I should go check that. Listen, as adults, we have trouble with that self-control, that impulse control. So forget it for kids. Again, this doesn't make me popular, but I recommend an old-fashioned charging station, like in the kitchen somewhere, where everybody's electronic devices go in there for charging. And so it reduces the temptation.
Oh, I definitely keep the phone out of the bedroom for sure. It's plugged in downstairs, and that's the only way I'll be able to get any sleep, to be honest with you, because there is that compulsion. Why? Why are we so compelled to respond to whatever happens on this little device?
Because we are well programmed. And I mean, I joke because I have the same problem. My e-reader died, and so I started reading on my iPad, which normally, if I happen to be having some trouble sleeping, I'd open my book, read for 10, 15 minutes, roll over, go back to sleep. Suddenly, that temptation is there to not just open the book, but to go, well, I wonder what's happening in the world. I wonder what's happening on Twitter. I wonder what emails people are sending. Oh, look, there's notifications. And the next thing you know, we are totally aroused. Our brains are wide awake, and it's going to take us that much longer to go to sleep. We know, heaven forbid, you've got something posted and you're getting likes on it. That's a dopamine hit right there. That's every single one of those is going to, again, alert you, make you feel great, but keep you awake.
My guest today on Target is Dr. Janine Hubbard. We'll be back right after this.
Now back to Linda Swain on Target St. John's on VOCM.
And my guest today is Dr. Janine Hubbard. She's a registered psychologist. We're talking about, this time of year and all of those things we tend to beat ourselves up about. Why? Why do we do that?
Really good question, Linda. We are always our own worst enemies, I think. And again, I think we've really emphasized over this past year the importance of reaching out in kindness to strangers and kindness to our neighbors and our family. How do we make 2021 the year that we're kind to ourselves?
And there's been a lot of those types of discussions over the last little while. Take care of yourself first. I know there's so many things that need being done, but it's not going to get done if you're no good to anybody.
No, it really is. Hey, remember when we went on airplanes? It really is that airplane analogy of you got to get your own air mask on first before you can help others. And one of the things that we are very concerned about is we're concerned about a groundswell of mental health concerns that I think are going to continue to swell over this next year. We know that the pandemic definitely worsened things like anxiety and depression in people with pre-existing issues, but it also created some new issues for a lot of folks. But what we know from a lot of the disaster research is that we actually see sort of longer term, whether it's trauma effects or whether it's we've just been so focused on daily coping that it's often after an event, once we kind of let our guard down a little bit because we're like, okay, we're no longer having to cope on the day-to-day coping, that we kind of collapse a little bit and we see some of that basically unmanaged mental health distress that we've kind of been putting on the back burner for the last 9 months. So we're really concerned about what's coming in terms of mental health. So it is going to be vitally important to be looking after yourself and being, as I said before, being proactive about it as much as you can.
Do you expect that boomerang effect?
We're certainly, that's the concern that we have within the mental health community. I mean, it's been building and building. And like I say, that's kind of what some of the research has shown. I mean, obviously, within modern day, we have nothing to compare this to. But if we look at things like the research on, say, natural disasters, is you often see kind of a delayed response in terms of the mental health response to it. Because, like I say, people were so focused on acute coping. And then once things kind of are feeling a little bit calmer, that's when kind of the mental health piece of it really comes to the forefront.
I reflected taking down the tree yesterday. I had to do it because old Christmas Day runs in the middle of the week, and you know how it is. But I always get a bit sad taking down the Christmas tree. I don't like endings. I like beginnings. I don't like endings. Is it normal to feel a little bit blue as we contemplate the long winter season ahead?
Oh, no doubt about it. That's okay, Linda. I refused to take mine down yesterday. That was on my plan, and then I said, nope, I'm leaving it up for another couple of days. But whether that was laziness or wistfulness, I'm not sure. It is, and I think we are quite concerned as people head into kind of this long, cold, dark winter. We know things like seasonal affective disorder can be an issue for a lot of folks, but this year in particular, we're concerned kind of about everybody's everybody's coping, given that they've already spent so much of 2020 cooped up at home. So again, kind of looking ahead and figuring out what are the things that I can do and be mindful, and maybe not even so much look at it as it's an ending, but again, it's a new year. So what are some new beginnings? What are some new potentials, some options? We embraced a whole host of new hobbies when we were all forced to stay home. Maybe thinking back at those and going, well, what were the ones that I really liked? You know what? I learned how to bake bread, or I, enjoyed doing some gardening this summer. Maybe I can work on some indoor herbs over the winter, or there was a hobby that I picked up, or even if it's something like, you know what? We really enjoyed playing those family board games. We can't do it as much as we did in the early days of the pandemic, but maybe we can set aside one night a week. So trying to reframe it and what are some new starts that I can embrace.
What's the difference between feeling a little bit down or depressed and depression?
Really good question. And it is a spectrum. And it's one of those things and it's really hard because we have all felt down. We have all felt sort of little d depression from time to time, where you're feeling sad, where you're feeling lacking in energy, whether you're, having trouble with your eating or your sleeping. Really, the key thing that we're looking at when we're considering kind of more of a clinical impairment or a clinical diagnosis is the degree to which it is happening and how basically the frequency, the intensity, and the severity. At what point is it interfering with your daily life? And that doesn't have to mean you're at the stage where you just can't get out of bed in the morning. It could be I'm functioning, I'm out of bed in the morning, it's a real struggle, I get through the day at work, but then by the time I get home, I'm done. Getting through that piece of things has taken the good out of me. Well, then maybe it's time to be kind of reassessing and looking, there's certainly no shame in it, and it's important to be reaching out if you have those concerns and thinking, yeah, you know what, I've had the blues before, I felt a little bit down, but I'm wondering if maybe this is starting to teeter over into the edge of an impairment. Absolutely reach out, because boy, is it treatable, and boy, is it miserable if you're not treating it.
And again, is that one of those things that someone close to you might notice before you do?
Very often, very, very often. And if you're at all questioning, first of all, look at your loved ones. And it may not go over terribly well the first time you raise it, but if you have concerns, you want to talk to them a little bit about it. Or if you are wondering yourself, talk to your loved ones and say, look, have you seen any changes in me? I'm worried about this, or I'm wondering about this. And that's the other thing is, listen, you don't have to meet full-blown diagnostic criteria to get treatment. If you are having trouble, if you're feeling like I'm just not coping very well, it doesn't have to be a diagnosable thing. Reach out for help. That's what counseling is there for. It does not have to reach that level. And in fact, we hope that you reach out before it reaches that level so we can, again, be proactive with you.
So we talked about the difference between being depressed and depression. What about being anxious and anxiety?
Yeah.
Because COVID has brought out some anxious moments for a lot of people, but it's not necessarily anxiety. What's the difference? Again,
I kind of use little a and big A anxiety. Feeling anxious is a normal part of human behavior. So is feeling sad. In fact, the most successful people in life have kind of moderate levels of anxiety. That's what motivates us to get up in the morning. That's what motivates us, to study for a test. That's what motivates us to want to do well, to get places on time. Those are all really helpful things. Being a little bit anxious can be really helpful. The question is, when does it start to, again, kind of cross over that threshold to where it's starting to interfere? Again, if with any of these, if it's interfering with sleep, you want to take a good look at it. We know early days of the pandemic, sleep was affected for almost everybody. But at this point in time, if you're still having trouble with your sleep, if you're still waking up in the middle of the night with anxious thoughts, again, that's a warning sign that you want to take a look out for. So it's that balancing act of, again, how much of it is impairing. Do we all get a little nervous before doing some public speaking? Sure. But at what point are you feeling totally impaired, incapacitated by it? And kind of figuring out the balance, and it can be a little tricky. The website Anxiety Canada is one of my favorite resources that I suggest people look at if you have any questions related to anxiety or concerns for you or your child or a loved one.
Kids are remarkably resilient, and a lot of us were a little bit concerned about the school reopening and how the kids would adjust to that, but many of them seem to be adjusting rather well. But I was wondering about who's having the toughest time with all of this. Is it seniors who tend to be a little more isolated? Is it the sandwich generation on whom a lot of people rely, and there's a lot of push and pull kind of factors in their lives, or is it kids?
I really think it depends a lot on individual circumstances and pre-existing conditions. For example, you're quite right. Most of the kids have actually bounced along with this remarkably well. I joke a little bit because I work with a lot of anxious kids and school-avoidant kids. Well, when the pandemic hit, they thought it was the best thing ever. But we saw a huge swell in referrals and concerns back in August and September when school was going back, because all of those kids, again, hadn't had to address those issues or concerns for many, many months, and suddenly it's become an issue. I've already had a few this morning, but we'll see the same thing today as parents are struggling to get their kids back to school this week. That break has been a wonderful break for most, and they're excited to go back and see their friends. But for some kids, that break was just enough to kind of, forgive the pun, but put on the brakes and say, I'm not going back, because they had that change in their routine. We have some seniors who have thrived through all of this. I know some who are off having, weekly or their regular bridge groups, not bridge groups, but book groups or virtual cocktail sessions with their friends over Zoom. And there are others who have found this extremely isolating and really challenging. So it runs the full gamut. I can't say we can generalize to any one particular group.
My guest today on Target is Dr. Janine Hubbard. We'll be back right after this.
Now back to Linda Swain on Target St. John's on VOCM.
My guest today is Dr. Janine Hubbard, and we've all exercised different coping mechanisms throughout the pandemic, and will continue to do so, no doubt. But not all of them have been bad. Of course, we've been getting outdoors more, with more outdoor activities, more time with family, cooking, pets, hobbies. Should we be exercising more of the same now coming into 2021?
Again, I think it depends on how your life has kind of resettled. But now is a great time for reflection. It is every year. But thinking back and looking at your coping skills, looking at what you did over this past year, and looking at the things that you do feel that were really positive. And again, it could be any of those kind of things. And then looking at it and saying, right, that's something that wasn't part of my lifestyle before. It was really important. I got great value out of it, whether it made me feel better physically, mentally, whatever. How do I make sure that that's part of my routine now that I've started to resume more of a routine?
And of course, we are going to have to set our expectations for this year. It's very likely we're not going to have access to a vaccine until perhaps the fall for a lot of us. And all of that's going to be prioritized. And by the way, we're going to have the latest COVID briefing coming up now at 2 o'clock live on VOCM. So we may get a little more information on the rollout of the vaccine. But we do need to temper those expectations somewhat.
We do. And like I say, it's a bit of a balancing act. So look at the things that you've been able to embrace that have been positive. And I'm hoping some of these are things that will carry forth well past, the pandemic, once things are back under control. One of the things I think is most positive has been the development of telehealth services. The ability to do a check-in with my family physician in a 10-minute phone call to get a couple of routine refills took 10 minutes of my time, 10 minutes of her time. Compare that to, getting out, driving, parking, waiting, all of those kind of things has actually made things much more efficient for a lot of services. And within the mental health world, it means we've been able to expand and offer services to geographic areas that were never a possibility before, especially as we're coming into winter. The fact that people don't have to drive through the snow, don't have to figure out parking, don't have to take time off work, and can much more easily and readily access telehealth. It's a little weird. It took some time getting used to it, but those who have sort of given it a try have really embraced it as a very positive change. And I don't see that going away, even once the vaccine has been fully rolled out.
That's one thing about the pandemic, isn't it? It's surprised a lot of us, because who would have anticipated that a pandemic would result in greater access to health care?
I know. Well, and it's funny because it's something that, we've been rolling out within healthcare for what feels like at least a decade, if not longer than that. And I'll be honest, a lot of us were pretty resistant, at least within my community. We're not very tech savvy. I'd never even heard of Zoom this time last year. And within about 2 weeks, we were all up and running and stumbling our way through it, but figuring out how to make it work and how to make it happen. And I think most of us have been pleasantly surprised. No, it's not the same, but it comes with some wonderful advantages. We were talking earlier about, kind of the increased intimacy with your colleagues on those Zoom meetings. Again, I've gotten to meet pets. I've gotten to see favorite toys. Again, parents haven't had to worry about getting childcare in order to come to an appointment. There really have been a lot of positives that were very unexpected.
What's your main message, I suppose, to listeners heading into 2021?
Please, and I apologize, I've used this word too many times in this interview, please be proactive. Take care of your physical health. Take care of your mental health. We still have a long marathon ahead of us. And you want to make sure that you are in as ideal a condition to get through that marathon as you can. So if you have any concerns in any of those areas, be proactive about it now. Don't worry about saying, it's really not that much of a problem. If you're concerned about it, or if a loved one is concerned about it, please reach out, address those issues now before they get worse.
And that's one of the things that you often hear people say is, I really need to check this out, or I really need to do this, but I don't know where to start. I don't know who to call. Is there any one number that you can call, or do you start with your family physician? How do you get started on that process?
There's a few ways. If you've got a family physician, that's a great place to start. When in doubt, you can call 811. You can go to the Bridge the Gap, which is the government resource. You can go to apnl.ca, which will help you find a psychologist. And when in doubt, ask, friends and family, but those are probably the key places in terms of a good place to start. If you're feeling more acute, the mental health crisis line or the Channel Warm line are also invaluable, as is the Kids Help phone line, which allows you to text your concerns.
And no one's going to look down on you,
Nope.
and no one's going to think less of you, and no one is going to say something snarky or anything like that.
There's no judgment. We have all struggled this past year in various ways, and people have been more open than ever about their struggles, so please don't be shy about reaching out if you think you need some help.
And what are your plans now for the year ahead?
Figuring out how to get through the winter without sort of planning ahead for something like a holiday is going to be challenging. Perhaps following some of my own advice, so making sure I'm getting out and getting more of that fresh air and the exercise, and, making sure that the dog is getting some regular exercise, and making sure I'm keeping up those connections with friends and family, and trying to pause and embrace some more of that quiet time, because I'm as guilty as anybody about letting that get the better of me. So if I have a resolution for this year, that's probably what it would be.
And I know a lot of people are down about not being able to get away, but that's all we can do right now. And listen, we're in a pretty good place.
As I said, I talk to people about feeling some survivor's guilt. We have been incredibly lucky. Now, some of it has been due to an awful lot of hard work and some very strong governance, and some of it is geographic, the advantage of being an island. But I'm really hoping that we continue up this trend as we go through and, move forward into 2021. Again, it's not going to be a normal year, but I'm not sure we know what normal is anymore, so let's embrace it and make the best of it that we can.
Dr. Janine Hubbard, Happy New Year to you.
Happy New Year, Linda.